All right.
Growing up, well, obviously outside of Christianity, I was influenced by kind of two people. The first is Elvis Presley. I was raised on Elvis Presley music.
Kidding.
In my home. No, my mum absolutely loved Elvis. I think she only ever played Elvis in the home. It was like nothing. Even the Beatles wasn't allowed on in our house. So,
but just a quick question though. If you say you were influenced, do you just say that something about the music had an impact on your life, or you just really liked it a lot? Because I think
both. I think his gospel music was absolutely. To me personally, I don't think anybody can sing "How Great Thou Art" better than Elvis Presley. So that's my opinion on that one. So,
no, well, it's hard to argue with that.
Incredible. And the second person,
I was a kid when Elvis was on his ascendancy. Oh,
the second person is this guy. Okay, so
that a cigar box there, brother.
Yeah, this is. These are all of the DVDs of Columbo. Every episode.
My gosh.
Now the reason
I'm hardcore.
I'm hardcore, that's right. And some years ago, I was introduced to this book that you wrote, and somebody talks about the Columbo tactic. I said, well, what's that then? Because I was kind of, I love Columbo, kind of raised on Columbo, watched it kind of, I think it was on Saturday mornings and stuff. It was on TV, we used to watch it. And there's something in here called the Columbo tactic, or the Columbo technique,
right.
Yeah? Can you talk to us a little bit about Tactics, this amazing book that's transformed so many people's lives, and about the importance, I'd say, of communication when we're sharing our faith with unbelievers.
Yeah, of course. And by the way, somebody might have noticed the subtitle of the book. It's a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. There it is, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. So what I did is I was very, I would like to say I had an epiphany at some point in my life that revealed all of these things that I'm about to share now. But it really was a process over a long period of time of engaging lots of people on spiritual matters. I've spoken to more than 80 college and university campuses around the country and in the UK and other parts of the world. And I realize, and it's tough dealing with people, because you're talking about very, very personal matters that people have very strong opinions about, and they're important. All right, so we're not just talking about Super Bowl, who's the better quarterback. We're talking about really important things. Okay, not to denigrate that, but just say there's just a different world there, and so consequently, the Bible has something to say. The New Testament writers have something to say about how we navigate. Okay, in these conversations, and that we're supposed to do it graciously, with gentleness and with reverence. Let your speech always be with grace. I mean, man, where'd that come from? Kind of thing. This Lord's bondservant is not to be quarrelsome. Well, see, a lot of Christians haven't figured this one out. Okay, and they get in fights. And my rule is, if anybody gets mad, then I lose. Right? You're not going to persuade people who are angry. It doesn't work that way. So, and I would get in a lot of fights. So I learned this lesson the hard way. And I began to realize that there is power in navigating with questions. There is power in navigating with questions. And as I began to think about the process and see how I was actually working more effectively, I realized that there's some steps to this process. And so I formalized it, so to speak, in this book, Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. And there are 3 steps to the process, but each step employs questions.
Yeah.
Now, in the book, there are lots of tactics, and these are maneuvers in conversation. Things like taking the roof off, and Just the Facts, Mammon, Rhodes Scholar, and What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and Inside Out. I have all these names for them. But the main tactic, which really represents the game plan, I call Columbo, after the infamous Lieutenant Columbo. And by the way, this is like 40 years ago on TV, right? Yeah. I have never spoken in a country and talked about Columbo that there weren't people in the audience who knew who he was.
Yeah,
he's
great.
Very well known as an icon, right? Okay. Yeah. And what's so nice about Columbo, the character now played by Peter Falk, is that he was a detective, and he would come into the crime scene, a murder detective, and he's got this rumpled coat. He's got the cigar in his hand, and that's why when you opened the box, I thought these are COLUMBO cigars, but they were the DVDs. So you disappointed me there for just a split second, but I was glad to see the full range and he just was so disarming. I mean, he'd come in and scratch his head and mumble to himself, look around, and like he's deep in thought. And I mean, this guy is stupid. He looks like but he's stupid like a fox, right?
Yeah.
Because he's got a manner, he's got a plan, and at some point he'll put his fingers to ruffle brow, with that cigar sticking out there, like this here, and then he'll say, "There's something about this thing that bothers me, Do you mind if I ask you a question?" And so he gets the answer. "Oh yeah, well, you're very intelligent, that." One more thing, and then he one more tings him to death, question after question. So, and he says, "I know this bothers people, but it's a habit. I can't help it." And so this is a habit that Christians ought to get into. They ought to get in the habit of asking questions.
Yeah.
Okay? And then I outline that in the book. Some particular steps in the game plan and particular questions that abet those steps. And I really am thankful for you putting the book up there. That's the 10th anniversary edition. I have gotten so much response from people about how this has radically changed their lives. Actually, that's the words they use. It's humbling to hear that, but it's very satisfying. This book changed my life because it gave them a way of maneuvering the conversations that was more relaxing, less confrontation, less combat, looks more like diplomacy than D-Day, that kind of thing. And therefore much more effective and more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Now, I want to just draw attention to something. You raised the question earlier, which is an appropriate question, that Jesus was deified, hundreds of years after the fact. And I asked a question, and it was basically, why would anybody believe that's what happened? Now, that's the second COLUMBO question. How did you come to that conclusion? What are your reasons for thinking that? Lots of people don't realize that it's not the job of the person being challenged to defeat the claim. It is first the job of the person making the claim to defend it.
Yes.
This is called burden of proof.
Burden of proof, yeah.
All right. So, if the DA comes and knocks on somebody's door and says that you robbed the bank, then you get to say to the DA, district attorney, prove it, because the burden of proof is on the challenger.
Yes.
On the person who makes the claim. Same thing in your jurisprudence as well. So this is an important principle. It's part of the game plan, but if somebody else makes the claim, instead of taking the responsibility for refuting it, which we may not be able to do, we may not have the background or information or whatever. I was able to give some answers here because of my background, my training. But notice even with my training, I would first ask the question, well, why do you think that's the way it happened? You must have some reasons to think that all of this has been changed over time. And there are actually very practical reasons why you can't change documents that are written in the first century and then copied for 2 centuries and go all over the Mediterranean region and then decide in the 4th century that you're going to change them all. You can't get at them all. Is Daily Telegraph. That's a UK paper,
it's
right?
UK paper, yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So even today's issue of the Telegraph, you can't do that with. Just in England, you can't, because it's gone. It's delivered to all these places. You can't change all of those. So there's a practical problem there a lot of people haven't thought about. But in any event, the whole issue of having friendly conversations is really critical. And since I've had so many unfriendly conversations, and I was at fault in the vast majority of them, or at least I contributed to it, I wanted to find a way that we could do this better. And I noticed, by the way, Jesus asked over 300 questions.
Yeah, that was his primary technique, wasn't it?
Yes, in the Gospels. And so what I've done is kind of formalized a way of putting that into play. And it's been very effective in my life and very effective in others' lives. And what it does is it takes, if you follow the plan, you get the picture, and it's all there in the book. Lots and lots of illustrations of times I did it right. And a few times where I did it wrong, too. That's instructive. But if you follow that, I can pretty much guarantee that it will transform the quality of conversations that Christians have with their non-Christian friends.
Yeah.
It's just it's so. I just checked at Amazon, and I've got now just in that 10th anniversary edition, which has just been out for about 15 months.
So hold us up again.
Yeah, it's been 10 years. Then I did the 10th anniversary edition, and then that's been out for. But I have over 1,500 reviews, 4.9 on Amazon. So I'm not trying to really, grandstand here, but I'm just pointing out this is really helping people.
Yeah, I would say it's a fantastic book. I would highly recommend it to any serious Christian who wants to get involved in evangelism, which we really all should, and apologetics. And it's not a very expensive book either, so it's definitely one for the Christian library. Highly recommend this. 10 out of 10.
Thank you. Thanks so much. But it goes to the broader point, though, of the conversations that we have with non-Christians, people who don't agree with our view, is that it needs to be genial. It needs to be friendly. And you can accomplish that by drawing the other person out and letting the other person talk, but the conversation is guided by the questions you ask. So it's an odd situation here, Paul, where you can actually be in the driver's seat of the conversation, actually just like you are right now in this conversation, by the questions you ask. Our interview is going in the direction that you've predetermined. And I'm following along because of the questions that you ask. I'm doing all the heavy lifting here, I'm doing all the talking, but you're the one who's in charge and in the driver's seat. And this is exactly the same dynamic that I want to have in conversations with others who don't agree with my views.
That's wonderful. And I'm also a church pastor as well as kind of doing reasonable faith as an apologist. And after reading this book, I actually did a couple of sermons. I guess I could call them sermons, but where I just asked questions of the congregation. I didn't actually really preach. So we kind of shared some scripture, then I kept asking questions. Why do you believe that? Where did you get that from? It's actually an amazing way of studying the Word of God.
Yeah. That's great. I hadn't heard that application before, but I'm glad to hear it now.
I mean, I wouldn't do it all the time, but every now and then I think it's very good. It creates lively debate and discussion.
Yeah, especially on Saturday night when you're a little short for words. You say, okay, tomorrow morning I'm going to ask a lot of questions. That'll take care of my sermon. Good for you.
Absolutely.
But you know what? I actually want to commend that, because I think that having a session like that, every 2 months or something, is going to be really healthy for the congregation. And sometimes a turnabout is fair play. So the pastor says, look, I have no sermon today. What I want to do is I want to hear your questions. And I'll do my best to answer your questions. Christians have a lot of questions.
They do, yeah.
And they don't have very many opportunities to have those questions answered. Now, this is what I do in my own broadcast, which I'm in my 30th year now doing that, and it's a Stand to Reason podcast as well, so people can go online wherever you get their podcast and look up Stand to Reason. You'll be able to benefit from that.
Okay.
But lots of people can come to my show to ask me questions because they can't find answers in the local congregation. And I think that sometimes pastors are a little bit leery of it because they don't want to look like they don't know the answers to a lot of questions. But I think it's actually healthy for a congregation for the pastor to say, that's a good question. I don't know. That's troubled me too. I'll do some work on it. But some questions aren't really answerable. You can only go so far with that, okay? But what it does is it communicates to the audience that, first of all, questions are okay. Secondly, that unanswered questions are also okay. that just because there are some unanswered questions, it does not tear apart the fabric of the Christian worldview.
Yeah.
We have so many things that substantiate it so well, we can live with some unanswered questions because every worldview has outliers. Every worldview has unanswered questions. Yeah. In my experience, the Christian worldview is the one that has the fewest, and has and what's left has the best explanation for the way things actually are.